But for now, let's go back to our model. So we have our sparse point cloud, which is created, and then we made our dense point cloud off of that, and then we made our vertex colored model from that. So at this point, what we can do, if we just want the model information with the vertex colors, we can go to File, Export Model, and if you click the Save as File type, you can save it as an OBJ. I much prefer the FBX format right here, because that's what that's going to do is give us our vertex information, our vertex color information, which is included in vertex information, as well as any textures we export, which we haven't gotten to yet. But if you want to, you can save it as this object as an OBJ or an FBX, whichever one you want, and that'll be a model that you can go and clean up. But while we're in here, let's go ahead and go to Workflow, and we'll go down one more, which is Build Texture. So now we're going to build a texture within Photoscan here. You're going to see we have a couple different mapping modes. We have Generic, which is what we're going to be using. It's just for arbitrary geometry. Adaptive Orthophoto, you would use if you're using shooting a lot of streets and buildings. Orthophoto for a lot of flat surfaces that you might be shooting. And then single camera we're not going to use. So we're going to go ahead and say mapping mode, and that's just going to be like a planar projection from a single camera. But for mapping mode, we're going to keep it generic. Under blending mode, I'm going to go ahead and keep it at Mosaic. And if I understand what it's doing correctly from the description, if I go ahead and turn our cameras on, what it's basically doing is you're going to see each one of these cameras has a line shooting out of it. So that line is shooting straight towards the object and hitting the object here. And what Mosaic's going to do first is a two-step process. The first thing it's going to do is have low frequency components of your image to avoid seams on your image. Now, these are low frequency details, so they're going to be not quite as sharp, but at least it's going to make your entire object look like one seamless texture. It's going to blend that result with high frequency components from the middle of your images. So this little line right here in the middle of your image is shooting straight on here. It's going to disregard any of the pixels on the outside borders of the image, and it's going to take these inside pixels that are probably nice and sharp and probably the focal point of the object and project those details straight onto the object to get you a sharper result. So it's going to blend a blurry yet seamless result with a sharp result from the middle of the camera to give you an overall pretty decent sharp image as far as your texture is concerned. But again, we'll go back in here to Workflow, Build Texture. Generic's fine, Mosaic is fine. Texture size here, you can change this to 8196 if you want to. I'm going to keep 4096 for now. And you have this X1. What that's basically going to mean is you can shoot this to several different texture files for the same object. If you wanted to, for instance, shoot this at a 16K texture as one texture file, that's fine, but it's going to be a huge file, and if you don't have enough RAM to support that kind of file size, you can get an error or it can crash. Another option is to increase this. So instead of like a 16K texture, you can shoot 4 8K textures. So you can raise this up to 4 and then type in 8K, and that'll give you the result of a 16K texture broken down into smaller chunks. But like I said before, I'm just going to keep this at 4096. We're going to shoot one texture. Go in here to advanced, you can do color correction, hole filling. We're going to go ahead and keep that on by default and then hit OK. And this process goes pretty fast. Took about 30 seconds for the atlasing, and then about, looks like 40 seconds or so, maybe almost up to a minute to go ahead and blend the textures. There we go. And if you want to see that result, you're going to see we have a new option over here, which is textured. So now when we turn on textured object, this is our geometry with the actual texture applied. Now you're going to see it may look a little washed out, or the darks aren't quite as dark as it would be in real life, and that's actually a good thing. You want as much detail in these textures as you can get in the dark areas. Number one, you don't want a bunch of shadows or blacks built into your albedo. When we go into the PBR type stuff we're going to do in Substance later. Another thing is you want as much information in the shadows as you can get, and by having these raw images, that's allowing you to get that. Later on, I'm going to show you a version of the JPEGs that we had. So again, we imported the raw PNGs here. If we were to do this exact same process with the JPEGs, you'd see we get a fairly decent result, but our texture wouldn't be quite as robust as far as detail in the shadow areas. It'd be a little bit more compressed information in there. But now we're looking pretty good, so let's go ahead and export this. I'm going to go to File, Export Model. And we'll go to Girl Statue here. I'm going to choose FBX. We'll call this Girl Statue No Masks. And in here we're going to have a lot of options. We do want to export the texture. I'm going to choose TIFF instead of JPEG. Everything else looks fine, so I'm going to hit OK. And that just takes 2 or 3 seconds. And now we can open this in an external program.